In this video, I want to briefly talk about some common concepts that village atheists or new atheists, in other words, people who are not seriously engaged with interacting with Christianity, with theism, or with religion, the kinds of comments that they often make about belief in God, comparisons that they make. I want to categorize them into some broad categories and offer brief responses to them. So the first group are comparisons between belief in God and belief in Santa Claus, Easter Bunny, fairies, things like that. In all of those cases, the comparison is between belief in God and the belief of some entity that is widely accepted among children. So many children believe in God. They believe in Santa Claus. They believe in the Easter Bunny. They believe in fairies such as the Tooth Fairy. And of course, the idea there is that, well, certain things that children get from this, they get chocolate from the Easter Bunny, they get presents and gifts from Santa Claus, they get money from the Tooth Fairy. And of course, those beliefs in Santa Claus or the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny then cultivate pro-social behavior in the children. And of course, the parents know that these entities are not actually real, but they allow the children to believe these things because they encourage pro-social behavior. Like, well, Santa has a list. He knows if you've been naughty or nice, so you better be nice. But once you grow up, you realize you don't need Santa Claus anymore in order to be good and nice. You realize you don't need the Easter Bunny, and frankly, you don't really need the chocolate that much anymore. In terms of the Tooth Fairy, well, you've left behind your baby teeth and you got some change, but you don't need to believe in the Tooth Fairy anymore. You've grown up. So the idea there in this first group, Santa Claus, the Tooth Fairy, Easter Bunny, is that these are all these entities that children believe in, but when you grow up, you realize you no longer need to believe in such entities. And so anybody who continues to believe in those entities is infantilized. They're believing like a child still. But when you grow up and reach intellectual maturity, you no longer need to believe in that way. Now, this is a silly comparison because for one reason, most adults on earth believe in some concept of God. Many of the most highly educated people in the fields of science, theology, philosophy, humanities broadly, all different areas, right? Now, leaders of state, brilliant leaders of state, not like Donald Trump, but actually really intelligent, thoughtful people, they're theists. Theism is clearly disanalogous to infantilized belief, and people have very sophisticated reasons for believing in God. So the infantilization argument or comparison between God and Easter Bunny or Santa Claus or fairies is a silly one, and it fails. The second one is to compare God to things like belief in leprechauns, Bigfoot, things like that. And in that case, these are folkloric ideas, or they are ideas that are widely, or they're held by, maybe like they're held by adults, but they're either held by adults as part of the common folklore of a quote unquote more primitive, unenlightened culture, or they're held by a fringe group that's interested in some fringe pursuit like cryptozoology, where they believe there is a Loch Ness monster, or they believe there is Bigfoot, and so they believe in God, or maybe they believe in aliens, right, visiting Earth. You could add those in there as well. In that case, the idea is simply that either that this belief is a primitive belief of this primitive society, or it's an intellectually conspiratorial belief, like some of these groups that are seeking, believing that Bigfoot walks, lives in the mountains of British Columbia or California and so on, or the aliens have visited us. And again, it's just not intellectually serious. It's a fringe belief. Once again, the analogy is a bad one. It's a silly one because belief in God is not like that. Again, belief in God is held by the vast majority of people on earth. And it's not just held by societies that are quote unquote pre-enlightened or pre-scientific. And of course, let's just keep in mind this sort of hubris of the chronological snobbery of that whole framing of the issue to begin with, because of course there is a lot of knowledge in quote unquote primitive societies. There's a lot of wisdom in quote unquote primitive societies. But leaving all that aside, nonetheless, the basic picture that belief in God is somehow comparable to belief in leprechauns or sea monsters or aliens visiting Earth or Bigfoot, again, it's just a silly comparison. Third is to compare belief in God with belief in Thor or belief in Zeus. At this point, we're sort of latching onto a specific concept of God, namely concept of God in Western monotheism, or the concept of God within Christianity, and then saying, well, that's like belief in Zeus or belief in Thor. So here the idea is again a little different. The idea is, well, there were these beliefs in various gods of the ancient world, and those beliefs have all died out. And the idea being, the implication being that the fact that your particular concept of God still happens to endure is simply a historical accident. That's the only reason that belief in the Western monotheistic concept of God is held by, a significant portion of the world's population, perhaps half the world's population or more, has a Western monotheistic concept of God. That's merely a historical accident, whereas Zeus or Odin, it's another common one, Zeus, Odin, Thor have died out. Again, historical accident. It could just as well, if you ran the tape backwards and played it again, it could have been that everybody's worshiping Thor and the Western Christian monotheistic or Judeo-Christian Muslim monotheistic concept of God never became dominant at all, but rather died out 1500 years ago or what have you. Again, this is not much of an observation or objection, because it sort of begs the question. In other words, invites the question to be asked as to why did the Western monotheistic concept of God become the dominant one? Why have these concepts of Thor or Odin or Zeus died out? And I think part of the reason certainly is that they are explanatorily inferior in countless ways to the concept of God that emerged in Western monotheism. So Western monotheism as a metaphysical, philosophical construct of ultimate reality is far more explanatorily powerful. It is it explains much more data and explains it in a more satisfactory way than positing some suprahuman but flawed entity like Zeus or Thor or Odin. And so there are good reasons why Western monotheism has become the dominant conception. It's not merely historical accident. There's no reason to believe it is so. A fourth comparison is to compare God to an invisible pink unicorn. I think this one has been on the internet actually for around 25 years. It's been around since the mid-90s. The idea of an invisible pink unicorn is clearly an attempt to compare believing God to a concept that is nonsensical, that is obviously contradictory, because you can't be invisible and be reflecting wavelengths of light that give you the color pink as an object. So it's contradictory. And of course, the idea of the unicorn is, again, can be back invoking the folkloric concepts or the mythic concepts. But in terms of the contradictory idea of the invisible pink unicorn, I guess the idea there is to compare it to something like the doctrine of the Trinity. You can't have one and three, or the concept of God as being both omnipotent and all perfectly good, because if you're all powerful, you should be able to do evil, but that contradicts the idea that you're perfectly good. So this is a clearly contradictory concept. Or perhaps one might say, minds are always embodied, and yet, so the idea of an unembodied mind is obviously a contradictory idea. And there are various other ways that people cash out the idea of God being contradictory, analogous to an invisible pink unicorn. At that point, I would just say those people should actually spend some time reading in theology, in analytic theology, in analytic philosophy of religion, to see how academics seriously engage with and respond to these allegations of contradiction within their beliefs. And you will find that it is not obviously contradictory, that there are concepts of God that remove various alleged contradictions, and you just have to invest the time to take it seriously. The last one I want to consider, so again, we've gone through concepts of, comparisons of belief in God to outmoded, infantilized beliefs from childhood, to superstitious, folkloric beliefs and fringe beliefs or conspiracy theory beliefs. third to beliefs in gods that have passed away, that no longer exist, and so it shows that it's allegedly a historical accident. And fourth, beliefs that are obviously contradictory and nonsensical. The last one I want to look at is, I think, just a general absurdity argument or comparison, and that's the flying spaghetti monster. So in terms of comparing belief in God to belief in the flying spaghetti monster, I think several of the observations I've already made can be made again. Is, for example, in terms of explanatory power and scope, the flying spaghetti monster doesn't explain anything like Western monotheistic concepts of God do, so I don't think it's an intellectually serious comparison by any means. I think it's meant, as I think all of these to some degree are, it's meant to poison the well, is to just discredit theism, to make it look silly. And I think once you realize how lacking in substance these rhetorical comparisons are, you can sort of dismiss the flying spaghetti monster along with a lot of them. The last thing I'd want to say, however, about the flying spaghetti monster is to appreciate where it comes from and what that actually says about the concept. So where it comes from is it originated in a letter that a young guy named Bobby Henderson wrote to the editor, I believe in a newspaper in Kansas. Where the school board at the time was considering the inclusion of intelligent design into public school curriculum. And Bobby Henderson wrote a satirical letter saying, hey, actually, I really agree with this intelligent design thing. In fact, I believe the intelligent designer is a flying spaghetti monster. And that letter became, I guess it kind of went viral, you'd say, back in 2005, and prompted him to write a book about it. He got a book contract, and I mean, he was clearly inspired because he wrote this book in the same year, 2005. It came out, I believe, in December of 2005, The Gospel According to the Flying Spaghetti Monster. It's a book-length satirical development of a religion of Pastafarianism that worships the flying spaghetti monster. I think it's actually a fun book, and it makes some interesting points, so long as you have a sense of humor. So I mean, I do have a sense of humor. I can appreciate these kinds of things, and I appreciate it as a satire and or parody. But in terms of its origins, the point I'd simply want to make is this, that the flying spaghetti monster started out not as a parody of theism or religion or comparison of theism and religion, but rather intelligent design theory. The idea was to challenge the idea of invoking an intelligent designer by saying, essentially, there are no controls on the attributes that you would grant to this intelligent designer. So it might as well be a flying spaghetti monster. And I think at that point, really all Henderson does is show his ignorance of intelligent design theory. Whatever else you think of intelligent design theory, intelligent design theorists do not attribute within the confines of their theoretical framework, they do not attribute to the cause any attributes that are not necessary to explain the effect. So for example, if the effect is the complexity of the information, the specified information in DNA, then they do not attribute to the cause of that effect anything more than what is required to explain the origin of DNA. So for example, intelligent design theorists do not attribute to the cause, a mind, an intelligent mind, they do not attribute omnipotence to the cause. They certainly do not attribute moral perfection to the cause, and they do not attribute any Pastafarian qualities to the cause. All they attribute is intelligence, that there is an intelligent cause that explains DNA. You can agree with them or you can disagree with them, but to suggest that intelligent design theory as a theory allows for the postulation of any arbitrary collection of attributes to the causes that they invoke within the confines of their theory is just to show that you don't even understand what intelligent design theory is. Or maybe you do understand and you're intentionally strawmanning intelligent design theory. And so it may be that Henderson was just completely ignorant. It may be that he was actually aware and intentionally strawmanning intelligent design theory. But that's the soil from which the flying spaghetti monster grew. It grew from a really misbegotten, ignorant critique of intelligent design theory. And if that's what you think constitutes a serious takedown of theism, then I guess you can put on your colander on your head and think that you're really intelligent. But in fact, you're not being that intelligent when you mock theism with respect to comparison to a flying spaghetti monster. You just look as silly as you think other people look. So that's where I'll leave it.